Welcome, everyone. My name is Susan Stern, and for the last more than 12 years, I've had the privilege of being Weizmann Canada's CEO. Thank you for being here for Mission Imperative and for being part of the solution. Over the next hour or so, we'll gain new insights into the climate crisis and what we can do to turn the tide and make the next 10 years count. The Weizmann Institute began its sustainability efforts back in the 1980s, led by visionary donors from Canada with the launch of solar research in the Canadian Institute for Energies and Applied Research. The vital work of our scientists continue today through their efforts to make our campus more sustainable and with the launch of the Institute for Environmental Sustainability. The Mission Imperative Tour will be in 4 cities across Canada this week with a different focus each day. Today's discussion will be about food. When we hear the word food, many of us think about fun, festivities, special moments with family and friends. On the global scale, we need to feed a growing world population under a changing climate, protect plant biodiversity, reduce damage to air, soil, and water pollution caused by modern agriculture. Science and industry play a critical role, and you're in for a fascinating conversation. For those of you who are new to the Weizmann family, welcome. Allow me to share what's special about Weizmann for me and so many others around the world. The Institute has an over 70-year history at the forefront of scientific discovery. And since 1964, Weizmann Canada has been helping to support these critical discoveries. The magnificent Weizmann campus is characterized by the joy and pursuit of science. Part of Weizmann's reputation is built by challenging current thinking with curiosity-driven research, which has led to life-changing breakthroughs. This year, once again, Weizmann ranked 8th in the world for research quality in the prestigious Leiden University ranking, the only institute outside the US to rank in the top 8 among the likes of Harvard, Princeton, and MIT. One thing the current pandemic has taught us is that science is the key to a better tomorrow for all of humanity. Weizmann research transcends borders and reaches us in Canada each and every day. In addition to the treatments and technologies we take for granted that stem from research at Weizmann, last year alone, Weizmann co-published with more than 30 Canadian institutions on topics ranging from environment to therapeutic discoveries. Encouraging dialogue and collaboration to promote new discoveries is what Weizmann is all about, which is why we're so very pleased to welcome you here today. Before we begin, we'd like to sincerely thank our event sponsors, Wealth Stewart, Nutrien, Jaroslawski Fraser, Raymond James and Rempart Asset Management, the Stephen Schiller family, the RBC Foundation on behalf of Marita Simval-Lazone Management Group, and Andrea Yampolsky of AY Talent. And I know they're all young people, so you're going to be all over social media. So if you want to post tonight, use the hashtag Mission Imperative. In a moment, Cindy Sherwin, journalist from CTV News Montreal, and a member of the Weizmann family, of course, will join us on stage as moderator for today's panel discussion. Cindy has worked as a reporter at CTV News since 1997, covering a wide range of stories and issues over the years, from politics to snowstorms. Thanks to the influence of her 2 scientist parents, Cindy embraced medical reporting and has also produced countless reports on research, innovation, the healthcare system, and at one time produced an environmental series called The Green Report. Most recently, Cindy won a journalism award for an in-depth story inside the COVID-19 ICU at the Jewish General Hospital 1 year into the pandemic. Cindy is very familiar with Weizmann, having moderated discussions for us in the past, and we're so lucky to have her here tonight. During this panel discussion, you'll continue to hear about Weizmann's newly launched Institute for Environmental Sustainability, Please direct your attention to the screen for a brief introduction.
I love this place. Believe it or not, only 120,000 years ago, the Dead Sea level was even lower than what it is today. We study what happened back then to predict what will happen due to global warming.
Today's state-of-the-art solar technology only works well in specific locations, like here, in the desert. Our future lies in designing intelligent materials that capture sunlight anytime, anywhere.
Clouds are one of the most important components of the climate system. They control the amount of energy that reaches the surface. So the question is, how will climate change affect them?
Our lab is studying microbes in their natural habitats to see how we can work with them to alleviate human impact on the environment.
By understanding when and where plants flower, we can greatly improve present-day crops and also introduce new ones that would better cope with a rapidly changing environment.
Did you know that it takes about 2,700 liters of water to dye one single cotton t-shirt? We are developing cotton in different colors, which would save a huge amounts of water and would create green new sustainable materials, or red, or blue, or yellow.
Israel is a country with abundant sunshine. We are researching intelligent materials that are not only better at harnessing this energy, but can even self-heal.
Plants and forests absorb huge amounts of carbon from the atmosphere. In our research, we're asking, how can we enhance their ability to slow down global warming?
Every second breath we take is created by algal blooms in the ocean. It's therefore vital to understand how this ecosystem functions.
Corn, rice, soybean, and this wheat are the 4 major crops that feed humanity. Improving their yield and nutritional value in a sustainable manner will benefit all of us.
Understanding how microorganisms influence our oceans now and in the past will give us insight into what will happen under climate change. This is critical information for ocean stewardship.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'll all get settled here. Hope you enjoyed the film. Isn't this a lovely light-filled room at sunset? It's beautiful. So I have 3 new friends here, so I know you're in for a great evening, a great conversation. Thank you, Susan, so much for inviting me. I think this is my 3rd or 4th high-quality Weizmann event, and I keep coming back for more, so I'm really pleased to be here today. I hope you all had a nice chat, made a new friend, had a drink. And when she invited me to be part of this event, I think I said yes pretty quickly, because being given the opportunity to use my communications background to help share with all of you the science that underpins the Weizmann Canada's mission imperative really speaks to my own keen interest, as Susan talked about a little bit, in science, in health, and meshes with my job for sure, making sure everyone knows what's going on, which lately has been about the Quebec election. Happy to take a little break tonight. But that's, of course, so everyone can participate and advocate for change and for action, and particularly tonight, action on the environment. So that's why we're all here together this evening. Before I introduce our illustrious panel more officially, I just want to give you a few little details so we can get the most out of our evening here together. The event today, so everybody knows, is being recorded, and so you can get that link. Everyone it will be made available to everyone, and even people who are not here tonight. So we'll start with a 5-minute talk from each person on the stage, from each panelist. They'll talk a little bit about their work. And then we would really like to have a great conversation up here, and we hope that you'll prepare some questions. We'll open it up to the audience at about 6:45, if everything goes to time. During the Q&A, you will see some Weizmann staffers milling about. They'll have microphones, so just raise your hand or get their attention. There's one right over there waving, so that we can all hear your question. And you may have noticed as well that there are QR codes on the tables over there during the cocktail. If you prefer, if you feel more comfortable, you can always use that and your phone to submit a written question, and if there's time, we'll try and get to those at the end as well. In fact, you can do that right away if you want, or during our conversation. I understand we have a hard stop at 7 tonight. I'm not mentioning any names, but Avi and Ron have to go to the Bryan Adams concert. And we promise we get there on time. I hear Ron is a longtime fan, so we don't want to stand in his way. And on a final note, as you all take your leave a little later on, please be sure, in the spirit of sustainability, to take home a special surprise that Weizmann has prepared for you. There will be a lot of talk this evening about food, about eating, which is wonderful. And so they couldn't possibly leave you empty-handed, and as you think about planning your next meal. So you'll all be going home with lovely farm-fresh produce. Thank you to Antonio Bono from Chenet Import-Export for generously donating all the produce that you see here this evening. So beautiful. So now for our distinguished panelists, your turn. You're in the hot seat. First, Professor Ron Milo, Dean of Education, Department of Plant and Environmental Sciences, and co-leader of the Institute for Environmental Sustainability at the Weizmann Institute of Science. And we decided, rather than reading everybody's very long, distinguished, impressive bios, they've provided their 3 top achievements, things that they're proud of related to the topics at hand. So here's what Ron told us. First, reinventing a creative balance almost every day that allows him to run his lab and lead several initiatives he cares about while still balancing life. For example, going to see wildflowers and then getting home to his 3 daughters in the late afternoon. Second, making the first holistic survey of the mass composition of life in the biosphere. And being able to help with the COVID-19 pandemic while his team continued their research on teaching E. coli to change its diet to eat CO2. Everyone, please welcome Ron Milo.
So hi everyone. I was actually around here once before. I was 19-year-old. I finished my first year at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and I got a few days off, and I flew to visit family here in Montreal. And actually it opened my eyes, because I had a few days to spend and actually connected with people here in McGill and in other places, go to some parties that I never seen before happening in Israel ever. And I could never have believed that I would, next time I will be in this area, Old Port, etc., I'll be speaking about, the things that we're doing and sharing what I'll be doing now. So one thing that we're doing in my lab is really trying to change the diet of bacteria in order to capture carbon dioxide from the air, something which we urgently need in order to deal with greenhouse gases, and basically changing the diet of those bacteria that usually eat sugar and emit carbon dioxide to taking carbon dioxide and creating feed and food and alternative fuels and things like that. So that's one main emphasis of my lab. Another is trying to do this census of life on Earth, because beyond just the challenges of climate change and the climate crisis, there's also another big challenge which deals with our interaction with the living things on the biosphere. And we want to create a census of life here in order to be able to have a benchmark into what's around us. For example, we were coming with a question, what weighs more, all the plants on Earth or all the bacteria all the fungi or all the animals? And how is that affected by us humans? So that's another thrust of the research that we're doing in my lab. And this, for me, is part of trying to take the talents that are abundant at the Weizmann Institute, both from Israel and for people coming from around the world, and connecting to the challenges of sustainability. And I've had the pleasure to lead, for the last few years, a center of research that was actually started, as you heard before, actually from donations coming from Canada. That's all about sustainability and environmental and energy research. And this is now, with the more and more abundant needs around the world, it's now being transformed into an environmental sustainability institute that is focusing on what the Weizmann Institute is good at, which is basic science that could lead to breakthroughs. And we found 7 subjects at which there's special expertise, and that would be the center of the institute. And those subjects deal with green materials, with renewable energies, with food security, with global climate changes, with pollution and health, and with biodiversity and marine research. So we have a lot on our hands. And this is being supported by also interactions with other universities and research institutes around the world, and goes hand in hand with education efforts, trying both in Israel and all the lessons that we learn to share it together with others in the world. So this is the institute, and this is the part of research that is coming from my lab, and I'll be happy to share it tonight and to do a discussion on all of those things.
Thank you very much. And we will get back to you for sure. I'd like now to introduce Professor Avi Levy, who is sitting right next to him, Dean, Faculty of Biochemistry, Department of Plant and Environmental Sciences, and co-leader of the Institute for Environmental Sustainability at the Weizmann Institute of Science. Avi's top achievements, things he's proud of that he submitted. He always feels that his next accomplishment is the one that will be the most important, so I've decided you're very forward-thinking. He is very proud of his students who have become leaders in academia and industry, and of his work dissecting the molecular mechanisms that contribute to the evolution and plasticity of plant genomes, which we'll also be hearing a lot more about. Welcome, Avi.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So Ron started when he was 19, so I'll start earlier. I was born in Paris, in France, and I was programmed by my mother to be a doctor, a medical doctor. So she failed, and the reason for that is that every time we were going to vacation, seeing nature, I was really fascinated, and I fell in love with nature, and I decided to immigrate to Israel. I had family, and I liked the pioneering spirit of the country, and I decided to be an agronomist. And the more I studied, the more I wanted to know, so I never been really doing the work of farming by myself, but studying and learning more on that. So that's what I've been doing for all these years. And what I wanted to understand is trying to understand how the living world was evolved, how all this diversity that we see was created. And this is, by Darwin's evolution, it's caused by mutations and natural selection, and this makes the biodiversity. And what causes mutation? Mutation is when the DNA is damaged and it's not repaired properly. If it's repaired properly, you cannot see it. And actually, one of our success recently was to be able to see precise repair, because usually you see things when they go wrong. But from learning what happens in nature when mutations occur, we also started to develop new technologies to modify plant genomes in a very precise manner. So how to make a specific mutation in a gene, how to replace a deficient gene by an active gene. And for that, we hope also to modify proteins, how to make enzymes more active by making a mutation which will affect the activity of the proteins. So So we started from our desire to understand plant genomes and nature, going deeper into developing new technologies. And then, you know, with age, you want to do something useful. And since I was always motivated by topics related to nature and sustainability and biodiversity, so first we started the company. So I said some of my students are leaders in academia and in industry. So they went forward and they took inventions from the institute and they developed it further into the academic setup. And one of the things we are doing in the lab is to try also to develop new crops. And I work mostly on two crops. One is wheat. So wheat is a fascinating organism. The wheat is really the origin of the Western culture. And it's not, one of my teachers was saying it's not only about agriculture, it's about culture. And wheat is like the crop of the West. You know, America has maize and Asia has rice. And we are living in Israel in a place which is one of the centers of origin of wheat. And the wheat grow wild in nature, and that's where humans domesticated them. So why is it interesting? Because we had a discussion over the drink that what you see and you take today for granted, that wheat grows, it's a crop, and you eat it, and it's part of our life. It's contributes the most to human calories. In some countries, it contributes 40%. In Egypt and in Turkey, about 40% of the calories. In Canada, probably less. For some people, even less. They don't tolerate gluten. But it's a very essential crop. So, and how come wheat, you know, came to Canada and became such a major crop? You know, it comes from the Mesopotamia, for the Fertile Crescent. It had nothing to do with Canada. And all this is due to selection of new genetic mutations which were done by breeders, by plant geneticists, and so on. So today we're trying to continue this because we have a changing climate, we have a changing environment, and we're trying to adapt plant. And we're learning from the wild wheat, from nature. We study some population for 36 years, plant by plant. We know exactly where they are. We follow them. We look at they evolve. And we try to understand their resilience and to use the technology we developed to transfer these traits to the modern wheat. Okay, so we can still grow our wheat in this changing environment. The other thing which I was very excited by is the opportunity to reinvent agriculture, you know, and this is the field of vertical farming. So we developed a miniature tomato which has a very rapid life cycle and that we can grow in a vertical farms. And we're trying to adapt now to make all the mutations which are necessary to make plants adapted to this new environment. And some of the genes that we identified and cloned make bonsai out of the plants, and it can be done in many species. So we hope to be able to adapt new crops to vertical farming. Today, vertical farming is mostly done with lettuce and greens, so we want to make it to many more vegetables. And the advantage of that are quite obvious you know, you can grow them near the cities where people consume, so you save on the carbon footprint. It takes much less water. You don't waste fertilizers which contaminate the aquifer, and you use less land because you can grow, you know, and we've seen the silos here in Montreal, and we hear that some people are interested to do vertical farming there. So I think it's something we might see in the future. And like agriculture started with this combination of new technologies and new genetics, I think the same will happen in vertical farming. So we're doing the genetics to make this happen.
Thank you, Avi. And now we'll hand it over to John Winter-Russell, who's a chef, comes at this from a different perspective, and a co-owner of Restaurant Candide. John is passionate about sustainable culinary practices and opened Restaurant Candide in 2015, is that right? His cuisine has a radical focus on seasonal local produce with ingredients and flavor combinations that are tasty and thoughtful. Please welcome John.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'm obviously not a scientist, but the reason I think I was asked to talk today was a lot about kind of how people will attack sustainability when they're not actually studying how to fix large world problems with genetically modified produce or studying the biosphere on a whole. It's very much about how do you attack sustainability as individuals or as small organizations. And the thing is like, for the most part, like, I don't run the World Bank, I don't run a very large hedge fund, I don't run a petroleum company, I don't run Cargill, so I can't really affect the major things that are like disrupting the planet and affecting climate change. And so the idea is I really like cooking and I wanted to open up a restaurant, but I wanted to be coherent within the values of keeping things as sustainable as possible. And sustainability for us is labor practices, waste, like anything and everything you can to kind of create a human scale enterprise. And so we looked at what we wanted from the restaurant, so people not working more than 40 hours a week, not having food that comes from everywhere in the world, so very much concentrating on supporting people that look like us as far as kind of our business model of being a small enterprise. So most of the producers we work with are like family run or are 2 people or 10 people large. And we are radical in the sense is that we don't make very many exceptions. So we don't have olive oil, we don't have lemons, we don't have pepper, we don't have spices that come from anywhere that's grown not from producers that we work with in Quebec. But then what that opens up is that we end up being a very particular restaurant and a restaurant that has a very clear personality and is therefore then successful because we end up being ourselves and we end up being able to support other people that want to be coherent in what they do, because it's really easy to like go, yeah, the climate's changing, I shouldn't drive a car, but you have to go an hour and you feel bad and you don't feel great about contributing to climate change, or you threw away that half-eaten sandwich and you're like, well, that's going to go in the landfill and that's going to contribute to the methane gas going. And everyone has this sense of guilt every time you do something that you know is going to be negative towards what's happening in the planet. But you don't feel like you can change anything because you're one person. So at least what we can do is we can build something where you know that even if you go to work or you go to eat, it's not going to negatively impact the planet. And that's really good for most people's mental health. Especially mine, because I probably couldn't do it any other way. And so I think that's probably why someone asked me to talk with a bunch of scientists about, a little restaurant in Little Burgundy is we're not pretending like we're changing the world. We're pretending like everything's okay. But yes, not everything's okay. We're talking about very much kind of like what we can do to make ourselves feel like we're not negatively contributing to anything. And that's very important, because it's either you do that and try and be coherent as possible in everything that you develop, or you get really angry and burn down pipelines, whichever one you prefer.
Well, it's interesting because I think in some ways you just outlined the tension between all these ideas, because I was telling Susan just today, I saw in the Washington Post that I think it's University of Wisconsin has started programs for young students, and it's called something like climate crisis therapy. Really, because they feel the sense of impending doom, they feel helpless, and they're trying to address that psychologically. And so you're doing something about it, but then there are also these ideas, these bigger ideas that need to be transformed, that need to be translated, that need to take off to maybe eventually trickle down so that we all use them or we all benefit from the wheat, So how do we bring those together? We need industry, we need governments, and we need everybody to buy in at the same time. It's a tall order.
So I think one thing we have to do to begin with is not to think in black and white. Okay, and I think that's really essential at making any progress. Because just, I was mentioning I was here when I was 19, so there was like 2 billion people less on the planet at that time. But at the same time, if you look at how much extreme poverty there was, or how many people, there's been so much progress that has been happening in those 30 years almost. And that's a staggering success, very much based on technology, and that technology is coming thanks to science. And we've made, in many, many fields, we see lots of huge steps forward. At the same time, there's also a lot of environmental impacts to that. But I think you should remember those two sides of the coin. It's not only negative things that happen. Actually, in many, many aspects, a lot of positive things. And at the same time, if we want to keep those achievements, we need to do much better. But I think to begin with, we need to understand this complexity and not think about it just as good and bad or just... And I think that's also part of, in relation to your question of how to bring on board, thinking, it's not like some people are the good ones or the bad ones in this picture. It's all everyone have to contribute, and it's a complicated balance in those things.
Do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the message to fight this eco-depression or whatever you call it, which is a real phenomena because the new generation can really feel that what will be the future. I mean, one of the things we hope to do in our work, but also in our colleagues in Weizmann, is really to try to think about solutions for the future. And I think that's part of our belief, that science can help and can bring these solutions. And just as a more cultural thing, in Hebrew there is no word for tragedy, Tragedy is something which is going to happen. Whatever you do, it's doomed, you're doomed. It's a kind of fatalism. So we don't have a word for that. We don't believe in that. It all depends on our choice, on what we decide to do, and we can change things. So this is, I think, the belief which motivates us. And I think what you do, it's very important because everyone, has to feel concerned. It has to touch anyone. Food is something that everybody does, right? A few hours a day. 1.5 round counts everything. So 1.7 hours a day, and and people through food can really think of the bigger picture. It's one way to educate, I think.
Yeah, I think the problem. There's lots of problems, but I think a lot of people turn to science, and I think science has a lot of the solutions. The problem is the scientists aren't in charge. So you can come up with a lot of solutions, but until we're able to get the people that it's more important that they make money than they save the planet not in charge anymore, that's going to be the crux of what we need to do. Because you can develop, imagine you're going to develop a wheat that will be twice as nutrient dense and doesn't need any pesticides whatsoever, but it costs all the companies who make it an extra 12 cents. They won't use it. Unless we convince them that it's more important to save everything. So how do we, I'd like to ask you, because I'm not a scientist, and I'm not going to solve this entire world problem, but how do you get the discoveries that you put together? How do you convince the people that it's their job to make decisions to actually do it when they're just as reflective on votes and money and other things rather than just saving the planet?
So I think a key here is also not for scientists necessarily to be the decision makers, but actually there's a course, I think it's taught at Berkeley and in some other places. It's called Physics for Future Presidents. It's actually very popular. People like to go to this course. And it's actually aimed at giving the way of thinking of science to people that are aimed to go to completely different subjects. So, there'll be the future lawyers, there'll be the future managers, there'll be all sorts of other occupations. But then you want to take something from that mode of thinking that, on the one hand, knows how to put doubt on decisions and knows how to use numbers in order to quantify things, and by that try to find not the black and white, but to find within the shades of gray what is the right balance among things. And I think we need to see more of that, and in that respect, I'm happy to be part of the Weizmann Institute, where for 60 years now, we have within an institute that's all about basic research, to also have a department for science teaching that's highly involved both in what happens in Israel, but also publishes things around the world with new tools and approaches on how to get into schools and the scientific way of thinking to as large an audience as possible. We also have another part beyond that, beyond the academic part, called the Davidson Institute, which is the educational arm of the Weizmann Institute, that also in Israel, basically every day when you open the radio, there's actually at least one show and they're interviewing people from there that are helping make sense of the world, but from the scientific perspective. So I think that's the part of the path forward.
So it's that multidisciplinary, issue, that strength that you have at Weizmann that really allows you to come up with these solutions.
But if I want to relate also to that, I think what's very interesting in sustainability is that it's not only for scientists, it's also for anyone.
Yes,
everyone counts, and I think people have lots of power because eventually they vote, and so the policy maker depends also on the public. So if the public is educated and wants something, it might happen. And education is critical also because many people are not aware of the impact of their lifestyle. And I took recently a job in Weizmann as in charge of the Green Campus. And I found it fascinating because, I knew well the campus, all the scientists and so on, but I didn't know all the people who take care of the waste and of the energy and everything. And when I'm in interaction with them, I think they really want also to make a difference. So everyone, I think, is empowered by this feeling that they can contribute and change things to a bigger problem. And so this gives hope. I heard a lecture by Al Gore, who was showing how green, he started by showing everything, how bad it is. And then he came with this very optimistic message where he was claiming that the whole ecology now is ready for making a change because investors want to invest in socially and environmentally valuable investment. There start to be a price for things, and some of the change have to be economical, and I think will be. I mean, if you have a house with a good isolation, you'll save on the energy bill, and eventually, after a few years, the investment that you pay will cover itself. So eventually, it will be economical, and eventually, it will come from a balance between all the forces. But
I think that the kind of like that worry and the feeling of not having any kind of like control and influence comes from the word, like you just said, eventually. Right? Eventually it may happen, but is eventually going to be soon enough? And I think that's where kind of like a lot of people will get that sense of kind of like, yes, we're building some really interesting things. There's a lot of work going into making the world a better place, but there's also a lot of people that like, the world is not a better place because of them, and it's really hard to feel like we're eventually going to get to a place where before it gets really hot.
Yeah. So definitely don't get me wrong. I feel there's a sense of urgency that I feel on a daily basis. It's just that I think we should think about it not as whether we'll be able to solve the problem or not be able to solve the problem. I think any actions that we'll do to find new, breakthrough discoveries, if it's the scientists, or if, better construction, like some of the key examples that we saw that are being done here in Montreal, or people trying to change the production. We also met some interesting people here as well. I think every such thing would make the end point better.
Oh, no, 100%.
And if we don't do it, it would be worse. So I think we should think in a continuum, and that I think should give us, both the urgency and the sense of let's do it.
I just want to put it into context. I am not advocating for not doing anything. Absolutely not. That would be bad. That would be very bad. No, it's just like, it's because it's very kind of like, I think one thing that happens in our discussions that we've had, it's like you both work on basically trying to solve a piece of the puzzle as far as like saving the planet, okay? And there are a few 100,000 people that are probably doing that. And then there's a few 100,000 people that are probably actively working against that, whether they know it or not. And then there's 7 billion other people of us going, what do we do now? And I think like that kind of feeling and that kind of like trying to understand and convey what we can actually all do, but what we can actually all put together to actually solve the problem is what's holding us back. Because we saw with like COVID, when COVID hit, the entire world changed in like what, 6 months? It went from being one thing to something completely different in 6 months, and that was urgency. That was, we can solve this problem collectively. Right. And so I think we're capable of doing it, but like, do we need to get more scared? Do we need to get less scared? How are we going to put all this together to work together where we can actually kind of like, all the things that the people are working on are going to be put together. And I think that's like the problem we haven't really looked at and solved.
Yeah, that's it. So do we send more people into therapy? But you're right, we can be inspired by COVID with what happened. We know how remarkable it is, how everyone pulled together, industry and science and governments, with their investments to get those vaccines done so quickly and to get the studies out, and a lot of them done in Israel, all that great work. But so where do you think we're at with that? What is the mood now? Does it ebb and flow? This urgency we're talking about, this imperative, is it constant work to wake people up? Has COVID eclipsed some of that urgencies? Where you're in the middle of it all the time there at Weizmann. What is the mood like now?
So I think there's definitely a sea change, and my sense of following this like for the last 20 years was that like it actually was almost it started happening big time around the end of 2019, and then COVID-19 was like it was a setback in the trajectory that it was aiming for. But it was also, it was also a global tragedy. It was lots of things. But for that specific thing, like there was like gained momentum. Things were, we moved into a different world for 2.5 years. There's also a lot of lessons, as you mentioned, we could take from it. But many of them are not sustainable. Like this thing that people change their perception pretty quickly, and you could achieve some things. It's not clear for how long. What are the repercussions? What are the costs, etc. But my sense is that like now, the trajectory that started then is now, and I think, I sure hope it's irreversible and would only be higher and higher the priorities, because I think that necessarily has to happen.
Yes, all the more important that we're talking about it now. We have to get back onto that messaging, right? Yeah.
I feel there is a trend of awakening, but maybe not as much as you'd wish and we wish. On the other hand, I don't think it's a right thing to say, the good guys and the bad guys.
Well, there are bad guys. Right? It's not good to say good guys and bad guys, but there are people that, it's more important for them to make money than...
Okay, but, you have oil industry, you grow cows, you grow chicken, you grow this, and it won't disappear overnight. So how can we get these people to work with us?
That was my question.
I think they want to work with us because they know that some of them have a moral responsibility.
I don't think we met the same people.
And some of them feel the pressure, and they invest and they want to change, and hopefully they understand that...
I can tell you about the people I do know, and that relates also to like the trajectory I feel. So, coming from Israel, most of my friends from school and other places, they're kind of like, they're entrepreneurs. And, it's a startup nation. Everybody's building startups all the time. And I was shocked recently when I was invited to like this meeting of like startups, and it was about people doing startups related to climate tech. We were always about high tech, and now it was about climate tech, and I thought I'll be meeting a few people there. The place was 5 times the size of this. Wow. It was completely packed, basically all with entrepreneurs that are like, there were like dozens and dozens and dozens of startups, all in the state, in Israel, around Tel Aviv, just trying to deal with how do we, brilliant new solutions. And that was never that way before. And it's like all the talent that usually went into the cyber issues and other things that, now it's all funneled like in a significant fraction in that direction. And I think that's a good change. I was very happy to see that. And I think that would bring us a lot of innovation. Whether that's enough, I don't know. We need more, and we need that to happen in many countries. And we need to have the continued support of, the one reason it's that way, it's because they're getting also the message that there are people who are willing to invest in it, that there's going to be, soon there'll be the meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, what used to happen in Glasgow last year, and hopefully there'll be messages coming from there also about the, paying for carbon or putting that into the calculus of, how much, how does the whole economics equation works. So, but I see that very strongly in Israel.
Yeah. Needing to have people and governments see it as an opportunity, to see it also as an economic opportunity, jobs opportunity, all those things, to transform all our cities. And
students also, we see they more and more come to the field.
Right.
And they are interested and they care. So, there is a change. But
when you were talking about all the people, good and bad, we'll talk about good, because all the people who go to your restaurant are good. So what do you hear from them? What do you hear from them? Do you feel they're inspired to come to you particularly because of your mission and your, leaning and interest in sustainability, or do you think that they walk away having learned something, or what do you think the impact is?
Well, the way we look at it is we don't like it. We're not when people show up at the restaurant, I don't give a dissertation to the thing. The idea is that in my early career and before Kanzid opened, I was trying to convince people that had restaurants to do this, to do basically a kind of like a holistic approach to how everything at the restaurant is intertwined, in the sense of kind of like the menu's small, so we can use stuff from Quebec, so it's not hard, but it's also then we can concentrate on making sure the food's good. So a lot of people will come to the restaurant and have no idea of everything we do behind it, and that's okay. But the thing is it's that type of expression is that you shouldn't have to come and go, we're a sustainable restaurant. It's like, why aren't you just a sustainable restaurant, or why aren't you just a sustainable company? Or like, because for the most part, if you don't say it, most likely it means you're not. At least in the general context of enterprises and things, it's like climate tech, does that mean every high-tech company isn't a sustainable company? And if not, isn't that very bad? Like, if you're not going into it and going, how do we make this sustainable? Like, it should be part of everything you build. And I think that's kind of like the way we look at it, is if people come to the restaurant and they're like, I heard you do this, then people will be like, yeah, we love doing this. For the most part, I don't talk about, that we don't use single-use plastic at the restaurant. I talk about how much I love peas, because that's much more interesting to me. It's just, that's me. But if someone goes, I heard you don't use single-use plastic, and we go, we do our very best, and whenever we have, a new supplier or an old supplier and they send us single-use plastic, we go, can you please not do this, or can we figure out another way to do this? And we try and just eliminate things that make you feel guilty because, you throw something in the garbage. And you don't want to throw anything in the garbage. It's either compost or, break down some boxes and use it in the garden. And if you don't do that, then it feels better and you feel like you're not contributing negatively. But we don't, at the same time, we're a restaurant. It's more important that people have an amazing experience and have a great meal and are happy, but we're not going to do that at the expense of, making a ton of plastic garbage every week.
Right.
Maybe one other place I see it very clearly is with the research at Weizmann. Many labs that for example, there's this guy who has this fantastic artificial intelligence tools in order to be able to design proteins or enzymes that could do all sorts of tasks. And usually those tasks that he would deal with are dealing with, this type of medicine or that type of medicine. But recently, his students are very passionate about using the same tools, but just in order to do things that would enable you to make good use of wood, to produce food more sustainably, other things. So that's one example. And then there's somebody who used to use his tools for studying materials in the field of archaeology. And now he moved into applying it. I think you saw him before about making cotton that you could change the color, in how it's being grown. So in order to save, the impacts of fashion. And so there's many of those examples that I now see, how people, they're taking the research, and now it's clear to them, both from the students, because it's usually bottom up, but also they themselves want to steer it towards solutions and towards things that would make an impact. And I think we should not underestimate, you were talking about, 100,000, 7 billion, the result of the problems that we have are the result of activities of 8 billion people, which is a staggering number that's hard to comprehend, but it's also an amazing force, because also the change, when such a large number of people, start to innovate, and now there's better ways, to communicate that, a lot of good things could happen. So I think that's also should balance things.
It's about harnessing that. And speaking of that, we can get to some questions in just a moment. So maybe think about what you'd like to do. You're all set in 3 minutes? Yeah. So in a few minutes, we'll take a question. So we'll head over there. I wanted to ask Avi if you could talk a little bit more when you talk about the genomes and the various maybe nutrient-dense plants or pesticide-free. Is that, when you create that concept, is that something that is applicable everywhere? Or are these not everything will survive every climate, so it also gets complex in that way. Can you give us some examples of how those plants would be used and where they would go?
Right. So first of all, we are living in the new era of where we have the genome of all the plants. We know all the genes of the plants. We know the pathway to make the smell and the volatile of the basilicum and the menta. And so there is lots of knowledge. In the past, breeders were working by trial and errors, and by chance something will show up. And now you can do lots of things, educated changes. And you can harness all this knowledge, so both to increase, to change the nutrient values of plants. Food security is not only about the amount of food you produce, but also the quality. You want to have enough minerals, enough protein, and so on in your food. So we know so much now, and that's people are doing this in academia and also in industry to try to exploit, to harness this knowledge to redesign the plants. So I think we are in a unique position. The humanity never was that there is so much knowledge, so much data that we can do things in a different way. And that's what we're trying to do.
That's great. So I think we have a question over there.
Ideally, can you describe to us what you feel that we will be eating in 20 years? No more cows?
It's a good question.
Happening.
I can take? Sure. Okay. So, I continue what I was just saying. imagine a tomato, whatever, and depends where you are from, and which would be richer in antioxidants, in pigments like the lycopene, which is an antioxidant, which would have more vitamins, which would be tastier because we know all the volatile that they produce. So imagine this kind of tomato that you can eat. So that's one of the examples of the food. I mean, I think the concept that genetic modification will make it tasteless is wrong. I mean, it's just the opposite. So that's, now you could make also the plant resistant to insects and to disease and save a lot on spray. So there is huge opportunity that in the ability to make new crops, new plants improved. So
I think one of the things we saw a lot when there was a lot of shutdown is that the kind of logistical structure of globalization kind of depends a lot on moving things around from very far away. So I think what you'll see a lot more, at least I hope you see a lot more, is a lot more places trying to make sure that they can grow enough food to at least feed the general populations around them. So the diet, you probably see ideally, yes, less meat, but hopefully more complexity because it's a lot easier to grow huge varieties of plants if you only have to ship them, 10 kilometers or 20 kilometers. The reason we have a lot of like mono staple foods is because they last very long, or they can be shipped very far, or they're very resistant. But if you have kind of like a food structure that's built around cities, or as you said, in vertical farms in cities, you can have huge varieties of food. So ideally, the way when you attack these problems is you look at how you can be food secure as close as possible to where you are, because then the logistical structure of shipping containers or large trucks or planes doesn't bother you when that whole structure kind of either slows down because of less gas being used, or because container ships get stuck in canals.
Yeah. Avi, you're nodding, so you agree with that?
Yeah, completely.
That's in the future. Is there another question out there?
Right here.
Perfect.
Yeah, hi. Just a question for Professor Milo. Just wanted to understand a bit better your carbon capture technology, particularly how it would be implemented in heavy polluted cities, or is it something that going forward, once the technology is fully implemented, is it something you'd put, let's say, on coal plants, et cetera, just a bit more clarity on that. Thanks.
Were you able to hear?
I
could speak a little louder. Just the last part.
So the question was to understand the carbon capture technology that you're working on. Okay. Once it's implemented at scale, would this be able to solve some of the problems we see in very heavy polluted cities, in China, for instance? What is your vision of your technology over the next 5 to 10 years?
So the short answer is we're still, as a community, my lab, but also as part of the community, we're trying to figure it out. What we're able to show is some milestones that actually 10 years ago sound like impossibilities of like being able to make these bacteria do the things that we find that they could achieve in terms of the diet. In the future, it could either be that like when you have a power plant or like a flue gas, say it's from steel mills and from other places, you could take that carbon dioxide and instead of releasing it to the air, bubble it, if you like, in these big fermenters, kind of like what you have in the beer industry, and that could serve as their carbon source and turn the CO2 back into useful things. So that could be one scenario. Another scenario is what's called as direct air capture, meaning you could take CO2 directly from the air and make it into those useful things. I would say that in both of these scenarios, the economic, or what's known as techno-economic analysis right now, says this is way too expensive in terms of what people are willing to pay and the cost of, say, carbon or those things today. So there's something here that we don't know how to solve yet. So either we'll make big breakthroughs or the different solutions, or we'll decide to change the economics of things, but that's where we are at.
Thank you. I thought I saw a few hands up.
Yes.
Oh, perfect.
Hi, Ursula Eicher from Concordia University. I mean, I think you shared a lot of fascinating examples on innovations that science brings on components, let's say, or the cotton. Or my question is about systemic change and probably about your campus, because there you deal all of a sudden with lots of different stakeholders, with investments in energy and circular economy questions. So it's more a system change. And my impression is science is less great at doing these systemic changes. And I would like to have a bit of an opinion from you of how you go about this to create these systemic changes.
Well, I mean, you're perfectly right. I mean, everything has to work together in harmony. I mean, you need a technological solution and you need to implement them. What we do at Weizmann is mostly looking for the technology. We don't have we have 5 faculties of physics, mathematics, biology, chemistry, and we are focused really on looking for technological or on scientific solutions. But it's clear that we have to work together with policymakers and be part of this global economy, circular economy, for things to be implemented, and working also with industry. So part of it, industry is trying to make this economical, and we have a strong technology transfer, and many startups, including in the field of sustainability, are being created. So that's one of the solutions. But you're perfectly correct. I mean, that's something critical.
So actually, I'm super curious, and I think some of the conversations I had with people from academia in Montreal at the time that I was here is in relation to how you combine between the insights of people from the social sciences, from the humanities, together with people coming from life sciences and the exact sciences. And we need those bridges, and that's only within academia. Then there's all these interesting conversation thanks to Susan that finds us, brings us in touch with people from industry, from policy making. So we need everybody on board. And in that respect, I think in contrast to what you were saying before, I think like this sustainability thing, we all have a sphere of influence around us. In almost anything you're doing in society, you have a sphere of influence. And in that respect, we're all in it together.
I think we might have time for one quick question, just a few minutes left. There we go.
Thank you. This question could be for both professors. Most of the research for sustainability has been on genetically modified crops that you were mentioning, or the bacteria. Can we think of genetically engineered microbiomes for humans to be more sustainable, and maybe in 20 years, the food or our microbiome will be able to be more sustainable for humans?
So it's interesting because some of the most breakthrough research on the subject of our microbiome and how it affects us is coming from 2 groups at the Weizmann Institute, that of Eran Segal and Eran Elinav. And they're really working on trying to characterize, and even before the question of whether you should change something there, you could actually use new tools and new understanding in order to look at a personalized diet where, based on collecting information on how, what kind of microbiome each of us carries and how it's being affected by all sorts of combinations of the things that we eat, you could, even without changing it, you could just tailor, your decisions or your diet to that. So that's like one of the interesting concepts that came from Weizmann in that respect.
But yeah, I mean, you say to engineer the bacteria, so that's what he's doing, trying to make a bacteria which are doing carbon fixation more efficiently by understanding all the components, all the enzymes. So engineering microbes is definitely a huge field. And the microbiome itself is critical not only for us, for digesting our food, but also for cows. So part of the methane emission is caused by bacteria. If we know how to affect these bacteria either by the food we give them or by other bacteria that could be in their guts, we could reduce a lot the methane emission from cows. And there is also the most complex of all the microbiome is in the soil. And bacteria also play a very important role in the structure of the soil, in the interaction with the plants. So this is also a huge field of research. So we have many scientists who work on that. And also in marine biology, microbes interact with algae and fish and everything. So, I mean, microbes are, the beauty of microbes, and that's why they're so powerful, is that they're in huge numbers, you know, so the evolution for them works superbly because mutations can occur in natural selection and they can be taught or evolve both through engineering and evolution to do new things. And so it's a huge field of research, very fascinating.
I'm so sorry that we have to bring this to a close. It's been amazing. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for contributing to such a great back and forth. Really appreciate it. And it's my pleasure to invite Susan Stern from Weizmann Canada back to the stage.
Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you once again, Cindy, for masterfully moderating today's conversation. And a big thank you to Ron, to Avi, to John for sharing fascinating work with us. And I think the word that comes to mind is empowering. Information is empowering. And I can't help thinking back to very early on in the pandemic, and if we hear the word pivot one more time, right, but I'm going to use it, and say that at Weizmann, immediately two things happened. One was 65 labs pivoted their research to focus on addressing COVID-19 challenges and made a significant impact. And the Weizmann Institute scientists immediately started outward, so educating the world, because we were scared. We needed information. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know a pathogen from a virus, the spike in the protein. We became so knowledgeable. So I think, you know, tonight reminds me, God forbid pandemic, but tonight reminds me of that feeling of empowering, that information and, you know, the hope. And so I wanted to thank you for sharing. And, you know, as you heard, we invest in discovery, recognizing that with time, space, and resources, the scientists at Weizmann put hope in action and make a global impact. And we're driven by the purpose of science to develop new knowledge and improve the world. So I invite you to learn more about Weizmann's Institute of Environmental Sustainability by scanning the QR code on the produce bags that you'll get when you leave. And thank you, John, because you provided a delicious recipe that you'll also access using the QR code on the bag. So thanks for that. And of course, no event will be complete without such important thank yous. So first of all, I'd like to recognize with gratitude our valued volunteer leadership here today, members of our Weizmann Canada National Board, Montreal chapter, and the Weizmann League, our young professionals, as well as the creative genius of Danielle Biton, who's responsible for this vision and the beautiful food you ate. I'd like to thank and tremendous gratitude to my team, Wendy Skalnick, Anna Katsaforis, where are you? Katrina Caruso, thank you. And the most important thank you goes to all of you who chose to spend your time with us this evening. So we're really grateful for that. If you want to learn more about Weizmann, we love to talk about Weizmann, so approach any one of us. And I'd like to thank the team at Grand Quai Port de Montréal for your warm hospitality. This venue choice was very intentional because of its efforts in environmental sustainability. So please hang around and ask some more questions. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.